So you want to sleep like a medieval peasant. There is something quietly appealing about the idea, is there not? No screens, no notifications, no alarm set for 6:15 with a backup at 6:20 because you do not trust the first one. Just honest exhaustion, a dark room, and the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that modern wellness influencers charge you $40 a month to chase through an app. The medieval world had no blue light, no doom scrolling, no caffeine dependency disguised as a personality trait. Surely these people slept like the dead. Here is the problem with that cozy little fantasy. They did not sleep through the night, not once, not ever. They slept in 2 separate shifts with a full waking hour in between, and they did it on purpose, and they thought you, lying there in your unbroken 8 hours, would be the strange one. The way medieval people handled the simple act of closing their eyes and lying down is so thoroughly, completely alien to everything you assume about sleep that by the end of tonight, you will not be able to look at your own mattress the same way. Before we settle in, like and subscribe if you enjoy these, and drop a comment letting me know where you are tuning in from tonight. I always love seeing where these stories end up. Now, dim the lights. Switch on a fan for that soft background hum. Get yourself comfortable and let your shoulders finally drop away from your ears. Tonight is a long one, so just settle in. Let the screen do its thing, and we will take it from here. Did medieval people really wake up at midnight on purpose and just sit there in the dark? Was sharing your bed with a complete stranger at an inn not only normal but expected? Is it true that sleeping naked was more common in the Middle Ages than it is now? Why did an hour of candlelight cost a full day's wages? What did people stuff inside their mattresses to fight the things already living in them? Were medieval sleep remedies actually more sensible than the ones you buy at the pharmacy today? And what exactly were you supposed to do if you had a dream about a fish? Congratulations, you have just woken up in 1342. Your pillow is a linen sack stuffed with straw that something has definitely been living in. The person next to you is a stranger who paid tuppence for the same bed, and the church bell that just woke you is not a mistake. Your first sleep is over. Your night, however, is not even close to finished. You need to understand something about the night you have just woken into, because it is going to change the way you think about every night you have ever had. You do not sleep through the night here. Nobody does. Nobody has ever tried to. The very idea of lying down at 10 in the evening and staying unconscious until 6 in the morning would strike a medieval person as deeply, genuinely odd. Not impossible, just strange. The way eating a single enormous meal once a day would seem strange if everyone around you had always eaten 3. It is not that the body cannot do it. It is that no one here has ever thought to ask it to. The way sleep works in the medieval world is this. You go to bed shortly after dark, which, depending on the season, might be as early as 7 or 8 in the evening. You sleep for roughly 3 to 4 hours. This is your first sleep. The church bell rings for matins, the midnight prayer service, and you wake up. Not groggily, not with the panicked confusion of a modern alarm yanking you out of a deep cycle. You wake naturally, gently, because your body has been doing this every single night of your life, and every single night of your parents' lives, and every single night as far back as anyone can remember. Then you are awake. For an hour, sometimes 2. This period has a name, several names actually. In English, it was called the watch, or the watching. In Latin, which was the language of medicine and the church, and therefore the language of anyone who wrote things down, the first sleep was primo somno, and the waking period was simply understood as the space between. You do not lie in the dark panicking about not sleeping. You do not reach for a phone. You do not count sheep, which, by the way, was not a medieval practice, despite what every children's book has told you. You simply exist in the dark, awake, in a way that feels as normal and unremarkable as brushing your teeth feels to you in the morning. What you do during this waking hour depends on who you are. You might pray. The church actively encouraged prayer during the watch, and several prayer manuals from the 13th and 14th centuries include specific prayers written for this exact window of time. You might eat something small, a piece of bread, a bit of cheese, a cup of ale that has been sitting by the bed since the evening. You might talk quietly with the person lying next to you. You might, and the medical texts are quite specific about this, have sex. Physicians writing in the tradition of Hippocrates and Galen recommended the watch as the ideal time for conception. The body was warm, the humors were settled, the mind was calm. It was considered the most natural, medically sound moment of the entire day for making a child. You might simply lie still and think, which was a luxury in a world where the waking hours were consumed by work that left very little room for idle reflection. Then, after an hour or so, you fall back to sleep. This is your second sleep. It carries you through until dawn, and this is simply what a night is. 2 sleeps, with a quiet, wakeful valley in between. This was not a regional quirk or a temporary fashion. A historian named Roger Eckerch spent 16 years combing through court records, personal diaries, prayer manuals, medical texts, and literature from across medieval and early modern Europe, and he found more than 500 references to first sleep and second sleep spanning every country and every century he examined. The references are casual, which is the most telling part. They do not explain the concept. They assume the reader already knows. A French medical manual from 1667 instructs patients to take a particular medicine after the first sleep. It does not define first sleep. It does not need to. A doctor writing that sentence expected every single reader to understand exactly what he meant, the same way a modern doctor might write, "Take this with breakfast," without pausing to explain what breakfast is. The phrase disappeared from the written record between roughly 1790 and 1830. Those dates correspond almost exactly with the spread of gas street lighting through European cities. When affordable artificial light arrived, the night stopped being a single, undifferentiated block of darkness. You could stay awake later. You could fill the evening with activity, entertainment, work. The 2 sleeps compressed into one. The watch vanished. Within 2 generations, people had forgotten it ever existed, and the forgetting was so complete that when Eckerch published his findings in 2005, the reaction from sleep scientists was genuine astonishment. Nobody in modern medicine had considered the possibility that 8 unbroken hours might not be the human default. Here is where it gets interesting. In 2001, a researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health named Thomas Ware ran an experiment. He put subjects in a controlled environment with 14 hours of darkness every night, mimicking pre-industrial conditions. No screens, no electric light, no stimulation after dark. Within a few weeks, every single subject naturally settled into the same pattern. They slept for about 4 hours, woke for 1 to 2 hours, then slept again for another 4 hours. Biphasic sleep, first sleep and second sleep. The medieval pattern, emerging unbidden from modern bodies that had never been taught it. So here you are, at 2 in the morning, lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling of your modern bedroom, feeling like something is wrong with you because you woke up and cannot get back to sleep. You might reach for a melatonin gummy. You might open a sleep app. You might Google, "Why do I keep waking up at 2 a.m.?" and read an article telling you that you have poor sleep hygiene and should consider reducing your screen time. And all of that advice is addressing a problem that might not be a problem at all. Your body might be trying to do something it was designed to do for thousands of years. Something an entire civilization considered so normal, it barely merited a sentence of explanation. You are not broken. You are medieval. And speaking of things in your bedroom that are nothing like what you imagine, let us talk about what you are actually lying on, because the object underneath you right now would be almost unrecognizable to a medieval sleeper, and theirs would be almost unrecognizable to you, and the distance between those 2 objects tells you more about how the world changed than almost any other single thing in your house. Your bed, here in the 14th century, is the most valuable thing you own. Not the most comfortable, not the most beautiful, the most valuable. If you are a peasant with a small landholding, your bed and its associated linens are worth more than your livestock, more than your tools, more than anything else listed in the probate inventory that will be drawn up when you die. Medieval wills and death inventories are meticulous about beds. They describe the frame, the ropes, the mattress, the linens, the blankets, and the coverlet in more detail than they describe the house the bed sits in. A bed was not furniture. It was an inheritance. It was wealth you could see and touch and pass to your children. And it was treated with a seriousness that would strike a modern person as wildly disproportionate until you understand what went into making one. Start with the frame. It is simple. 4 posts, 4 rails, a headboard if you are lucky. The wood is oak if you can afford it, cheaper timber if you cannot. Nothing here is ornamental. It is functional. The rails are drilled with holes and strung with ropes, woven back and forth across the frame to form a surface, the way you might string a tennis racket if the tennis racket were the size of a dining table. These ropes are the foundation of your mattress. They sag over time, which is why you periodically tighten them, which is where the phrase "sleep tight" comes from. It is not a sentiment, it is an instruction. Tighten the ropes, or you will wake up in a hollow. On top of the ropes goes the mattress, and the mattress is a sack. That is not an exaggeration or a simplification. It is a large bag made of linen or rough cloth, stuffed with whatever you can get. If you are poor, that means straw, dried bracken, or rushes. If you are middling, it might be wool, or a mixture of wool and straw. If you are wealthy, it is goose feathers. And the difference between sleeping on straw and sleeping on goose feathers is the difference between lying on a bag of crumbling twigs and lying on a cloud. And everyone knows this. And the feather bed is coveted with an intensity that borders on obsession. The straw mattress is not permanent. You replace the stuffing seasonally, ideally after the autumn harvest, when fresh straw is abundant and cheap. By late summer, the old straw has compressed into a flat, crumbling layer that smells faintly of dust and whatever has been living in it for the past year. You pull the sack apart, shake out the old filling, wash the linen if you can, and restuff it. This is real labor. It takes time, and the phrase "making the bed in a medieval household" is not the quick gesture of pulling up a duvet. It is a genuine chore, involving restuffing, smoothing, and arranging a heavy, unwieldy sack of plant material into something flat enough to sleep on. On top of the mattress you lay your linens, and here is where the money lives. Linen sheets were expensive. Properly woven linen required flax, which required specific growing conditions, which required labor at every stage, from planting to retting to spinning to weaving. A single pair of linen sheets could cost a working family 4 to 6 weeks of labor. This is why sheets appear in wills. This is why they were counted, named, and tracked from generation to generation. A woman's dowry often included bed linens, specifically because they represented portable, durable, tangible wealth. You did not throw sheets away. You patched them, turned them, cut them down, and repurposed them until the fabric could not hold a stitch. Your blanket is wool, heavy, scratchy, warm. If you are wealthier, you might have a fur coverlet on top of the wool, rabbit or sheepskin, something that traps heat against the cold that presses through the unglazed window and the gaps in the walls. Beneath your head is a bolster, which is a long cylindrical pillow that runs the full width of the bed. It is shared. Everyone sleeping in the bed rests their head on the same bolster, which is stuffed with the same materials as the mattress. A personal pillow, a single pillow for a single head, is a luxury that most people here have never seen. Added up. A basic bed frame and straw mattress represents about 2 to 3 weeks of a laborer's wages. A set of linen sheets adds another 4 to 6 weeks. Wool blankets add more. A complete bed with frame, mattress, linens, blankets, and a bolster can approach 2 to 3 months of total income for a working family. You agonize over buying a new mattress in a showroom where a salesperson follows you around asking about your preferred firmness level. The medieval version of that decision carried the same financial weight as buying a car, and unlike a car, the bed would be listed in your will and fought over by your heirs. The wealthy version of this equation is even more staggering. A great bed with a carved oak frame, a goose feather mattress, embroidered linen sheets, wool and fur coverings, and a set of curtained hangings draped from a canopy could cost more than a small house. The hangings alone, the fabric panels that enclose the bed for warmth and privacy, could represent 6 months to a full year of a skilled craftsman's wages. A single set of bed curtains, worth more than half a year of someone's entire working life. And yet, they were standard in any household that could afford them, because a bed was not just where you slept. It was the single most visible statement of your wealth, your status, and your place in the world. The most expensive mattress you have ever slept on gave you a better night's rest than any of this. That is almost certainly true, but the most expensive mattress you have ever slept on represented a smaller fraction of your total wealth than a medieval peasant's straw sack represented of theirs. You sleep better, they invested more. And the strange thing is, the quality of the sleep was not the point. The bed was shelter, warmth, wealth, inheritance, and status, compressed into a single piece of furniture, and it sat at the center of the household the way the television sits at the center of yours. Not that you were ever in that bed alone, of course, because the question of who else is lying next to you on that expensive, rope-sprung, straw-stuffed investment is about to make the whole arrangement considerably more interesting. The answer to who is in your bed is, depending on the night, somewhere between 3 and 7 people. And not one of them thinks this is unusual. You sleep with your family, all of them, in one bed. Your spouse is beside you, your children are arranged by age along the remaining space, and if the household includes a servant or an apprentice, they are somewhere in the room too, either on a thin straw pallet on the floor, or, if there is only one bed, at the foot of it, with their own blanket and a clear understanding of where the boundaries are. The bed is not a private space. It is a shared utility. Thinking of a bed as something that belongs to 2 people, or God forbid 1 person, would make about as much sense to a medieval household as buying a separate dining table for each member of the family. You have one bed because beds are expensive, and everyone sleeps in it because that is what beds are for. There is a hierarchy to the arrangement, and it matters. The wall side of the bed is the best position. It is warmer because the wall blocks drafts, and it is safer because nobody can reach you from the exposed side of the room. The head of the household and their spouse take the wall side. Children are placed between the parents, or along the outer edge, depending on their age. The youngest children, once out of the cradle, sleep nearest to the mother. The oldest children sleep nearest to the edge, which is the coldest, most exposed, least comfortable position, which is also a quiet rehearsal for the day they will leave the household entirely and have to make their own arrangements. Probate inventories from 14th and 15th century English households tell the story in numbers. One bed appears in the inventory. The household has 5 members, sometimes 6, sometimes 8. The math is not complicated. Everyone fits because everyone has always fit, and the concept of personal sleeping space is roughly as developed as the concept of personal airspace. You do not have a side of the bed. You have a position in the arrangement, and that position reflects your status in the family as clearly as where you sit at the table during meals. And it was not just families. The medieval world extended this logic to every sleeping situation without a flicker of self-consciousness. Guild regulations required apprentices to share beds. 2 apprentices per bed was standard. 3 was not unusual. The bed was provided by the master as part of the apprenticeship agreement, and the expectation was that young men who spent the day learning a trade together would spend the night in the same bed without anyone considering this remarkable. Monastic sleeping arrangements were the notable exception, and they were exceptional precisely because they were designed to prevent the thing that shared sleeping might lead to. Monks slept in individual beds in open dormitories, with candles burning all night, and doors that were never closed. The rule of solitary sleeping in a lit, supervised room was a specifically engineered solution to a specifically feared problem, and the engineering tells you everything about what the default looked like. Hospital beds worked the same way. If you were ill enough to be admitted to a medieval hospital, which was more of a charitable shelter than a medical facility in the modern sense, you would share your bed with 1, 2, or 3 other patients. This was not overcrowding. This was the plan. Bed space was allocated the way a modern hospital allocates chairs in a waiting room. You got a portion. The fact that the person next to you might have an entirely different illness, or might die during the night, was part of the arrangement, and was handled with prayers rather than partitions. The place where this communal logic reaches its most vivid expression is the inn, but we will come to that later. For now, understand this. The idea that sleep is a private act performed in a private room, in a private bed, is an invention. It is a recent invention. It is roughly as old as the novel, the steam engine, and the idea that children should not work in mines. Before it was invented, sleep was a social activity performed in company, and the person who slept alone was not enjoying a luxury. They were either very rich, very holy, or very ill. Solitary sleep was the anomaly. Shared sleep was simply sleep. You are lying in that crowded bed now, shoulder to shoulder with the person beside you, a child's foot pressing into your lower back, the sound of 4 other people, breathing in slightly different rhythms, filling the dark room. And you are, it should be mentioned, completely naked. This is not a detail anyone here is surprised by. You are naked because everyone is naked. Sleeping naked was the default across nearly every social class in medieval Europe, and the image you have in your head of medieval people sleeping in long white nightgowns with little pointed caps is almost entirely a fantasy invented by Victorian illustrators who could not bring themselves to draw the truth. The evidence is everywhere once you know to look for it. Illuminated manuscripts from the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries depict sleepers in beds. The sleepers are naked, not suggestively draped in sheets, with a bare shoulder peeking out. Naked. Woodcuts show the same thing. Legal depositions show the same thing. Court records from fire inquests describe witnesses fleeing burning buildings in the middle of the night, wearing nothing at all, and the scribe recording this does not note it as remarkable. It is simply what people were wearing when the fire started, which was nothing, because that is what everyone wore to bed. The medical reasoning supported it. Physicians working in the tradition of Galen and Hippocrates taught that the body needed to release vapors during sleep that had been trapped by clothing during the day. Sleeping in your clothes, or in any garment that constricted the body, was believed to prevent this release and lead to illness. The prescription was clear. Take your clothes off. Get into bed. Let the body breathe. The one exception was the head, which should be covered at all times during sleep. The nightcap was real, and it was nearly universal, but it was not a fashion statement. It was medical equipment. The humoral theory held that cold air entering through the skull during sleep could unbalance the body's internal temperature and cause ailments ranging from headaches to madness. You covered your head the way a modern person might take a vitamin, not because you enjoyed it, but because someone with authority told you it was important. The shift toward nightclothes began in the 16th century among the wealthy and took another 200 years to reach the general population. The nightshirt, the nightgown, the elaborate embroidered sleeping attire that appears in paintings of aristocratic bedchambers, all of that was a marker of wealth first and a garment second. Owning something specifically made for sleeping meant you had enough money to have clothes you did not also need for working. The poor continued sleeping naked well into the early modern period for the same reason they continued sleeping on straw. It was not a choice. It was what not having money looked like. The modern argument about whether sleeping naked is healthier plays out every few years in wellness magazines and lifestyle blogs with the confident authority of people who believe they have discovered something new. Medieval physicians were making the same argument 600 years ago with different vocabulary and identical conviction. The packaging has changed. The human body's relationship with its own clothing has not moved a single inch. So here you are, naked, on a straw mattress, surrounded by your family, in the dark. And now, with the intimacy of the scene fully established, it is time to talk about the other inhabitants of this bed, the ones you did not invite, the ones who were here before you arrived and will be here long after you are gone, the ones who have been waiting very patiently in the straw for you to lie still. Your mattress is alive, not metaphorically. The straw stuffed inside the linen sack that you are lying on is home to a thriving community of small, hungry creatures who consider your body heat and your blood to be the entire point of the arrangement. Fleas are the most numerous. They live in the straw, in the rushes scattered on the floor, in the wool of the blankets, and in the fur of the dog that sleeps near the hearth and visits the bed whenever it feels like it. Lice are on your body already, in your hair, in any remaining fabric you might have draped over yourself. And bedbugs, the species formerly known as Cimex lectularius, have been sharing beds with human beings for so long that archaeologists have found their remains in settlements dating back thousands of years. They are not an infestation, they are a feature. They were here first. Medieval people knew about all of this, understood it, and managed it with a pragmatism that was neither panicked nor resigned. They stuffed their mattresses with herbs, believed to repel insects. Fleabane was popular, named for the one thing it was supposed to do. Pennyroyal, mugwort, and lavender were packed in among the straw, and the bed, when freshly made, smelled like a garden for about a week before the herbs dried out and the residents returned. Some households burned sulfur in the bedchamber, which may have worked on the insects, but almost certainly did nothing pleasant for the people sleeping in the room afterward. Others sprinkled the bedding with vinegar, or scattered dried wormwood across the floor. The wealthier sort had a more creative solution. The flea fur was a small animal pelt, usually from a sable or a marten, worn around the neck during the day, or kept in the bed at night. The theory was that fleas would be attracted to the warmth and texture of the fur, and congregate there instead of on the human body. You could then remove the pelt in the morning, shake the fleas off outside, and return to a theoretically less infested bed. Whether this worked is debatable. That people paid real money for it is not. The flea fur appears in household inventories of the wealthy, alongside jewelry and fine linens, which tells you exactly how seriously the problem was taken and how much people were willing to spend on what was essentially a medieval version of a plug-in mosquito repellent. Here is where the status flip lands. You would assume the wealthier the person, the cleaner the bed. The opposite was frequently true. A peasant straw mattress was replaced every autumn with fresh material. The old straw was thrown out, the sack was washed or replaced, and the bed started the year relatively clean. A wealthy household's feather mattress could not be treated this way. Feathers were expensive. The mattress was an investment. It stayed in the bed for years, sometimes decades, and the warm, soft, enclosed environment of a goose feather mattress was paradise for Cimex lectularius. The bugs burrowed deep, reproduced in the warmth, and built colonies that were almost impossible to eradicate without destroying the mattress itself. The peasant sleeping on fresh straw every autumn had fewer bedbugs than the lord sleeping on a feather bed that had not been opened in 5 years. Poverty, in this one specific category, was genuinely winning. The sounds of a medieval bed at night, if you lay very still and let the room settle around you, included the rustle of straw compressing under shifting bodies, the faint scratching of something small moving through the stuffing, the occasional sharp itch on the ankle or the neck that you had long since stopped investigating because the answer was always the same, and the steady, slow breathing of the people around you, each of them lying naked in the same conditions, each of them unbothered by a situation that would send a modern person shopping for a new mattress and possibly a new house. You lived with it. Everyone lived with it. The medieval medical establishment acknowledged bedbugs and fleas as a permanent condition of sleeping life rather than a solvable problem. In much the same way, modern medicine acknowledges the common cold. You managed the symptoms. You mitigated the worst of it. You accepted that this was part of what it meant to close your eyes at night. And you slept anyway, because what else was there to do? The dark was total. The bed was warm. The herbs smelled faintly of summer, and the second sleep was coming. And you would burn something to keep that darkness at bay, if you could. But light, it turns out, was the one luxury that almost nobody here could afford for long. And the economics of a single burning candle are about to make your modern electricity bill feel like the most generous gift the universe has ever handed you. The thing about darkness in the medieval world is that it was not a setting on a dimmer switch. It was not the gentle dark of a modern bedroom, with the glow of a charging phone and the green dot of a smoke detector and the faint bleed of a streetlight through the curtains. It was absolute. The kind of dark where you hold your hand 6 inches from your face and see nothing. The kind of dark that modern humans almost never experience unless they go looking for it in caves or remote wilderness. And even then, they carry a torch and the knowledge that a light switch exists somewhere behind them. Here, no switch exists. Here, when the sun goes down, the world disappears, and the only thing standing between you and total blindness is whatever you can set on fire. And setting things on fire costs money you do not have. There are 3 tiers of artificial light available to you, and each one tells a different economic story. The cheapest option is the rushlight. You make it yourself. You go to the nearest marsh or wet ditch and collect rushes, the long, thin, green reeds that grow in standing water. You bring them home and peel them, stripping away the outer skin and leaving only the white pith inside, with a single thin strip of green bark running the length to hold it together. Then you dip the peeled rush into melted animal fat, tallow, saved from cooking, and let it harden. The finished product is about a foot long, pale, greasy, and fragile. You clamp it in a holder at a slight angle, light the tip, and it burns for somewhere between 15 and 45 minutes, depending on its thickness and how well the fat has soaked in. The light it produces is roughly equivalent to a modern birthday candle, a small, wavering, yellowish glow that illuminates a circle about the size of a dinner plate. You can see your hands. You can see the face of the person sitting directly across from you. You cannot see the far wall of the room. This is the light most medieval peasants actually used, and the preparation of rushlights was a household chore performed regularly, taking hours of gathering, peeling, and dipping to produce a batch that might last a week or 2 of evenings. The middle option is the tallow candle. Tallow is rendered animal fat, usually beef or mutton, and a tallow candle is made by repeatedly dipping a wick into melted tallow until enough layers have built up to form a solid cylinder. It burns longer and brighter than a rushlight. It also smells terrible. Burning tallow produces a greasy, acrid, meaty smoke that fills the room and clings to fabric and hair and skin. A church that burned tallow candles smelled like a kitchen. A bedroom that burned one smelled like a bedroom in a kitchen. The cost was significant. A single tallow candle providing 2 to 3 hours of usable light represented roughly half a day's wages for an unskilled laborer. 2 candles for an evening cost a full day's work. You did not light tallow candles to read by, or to socialize by, or to enjoy. You lit them because you needed to do something specific that required seeing, and you put them out the moment you were finished. The expensive option, the one reserved for churches and the wealthy and special occasions, was the beeswax candle. Beeswax burns clean. It produces a bright, steady, warm light with almost no smoke and a faint smell of honey. It is, by any measure, a beautiful thing to watch burn. It is also staggeringly expensive. A single beeswax candle, providing 4 to 5 hours of good light, cost roughly a full day's wages for a skilled carpenter, not an unskilled laborer, a skilled carpenter, a man who had completed a 7-year apprenticeship and worked at the highest rate the construction trade offered. 1 candle, 1 night, 1 day's pay, gone by midnight. A parish church consumed more beeswax in a year than an entire village could afford for domestic use. The brightness and purity of church candles were not just liturgical requirements. They were a display of institutional wealth that the congregation saw every Sunday and could never replicate at home. The light of God was beeswax. The light of your kitchen was a sputtering rush dipped in mutton fat. The comparison was not lost on anyone. Now multiply any of these costs across an evening. You come home from work at dusk. You have perhaps 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. If you light a single tallow candle for those 3 hours, you have spent half a day's wages on one evening of dim, smoky visibility. If you do this every night for a week, you have spent 3.5 days' wages on the ability to see inside your own home after dark. In a month, the cost of nightly candlelight approaches or exceeds the cost of the food that kept you alive to earn the money. Light was not a utility. It was a luxury, and for most people, most of the time, the rational economic decision was to simply go without it. This is where curfew enters the story, and the word itself tells you everything. Curfew comes from the Norman French couvre-feu, which means cover fire. When the curfew bell rang in a medieval town, typically between 8 and 9 in the evening, you were required to cover or extinguish your fires. This was not a social policy. It was a fire prevention regulation, and the reasoning was brutally practical. Medieval towns were built of timber and thatch. A single unattended fire in a single house could, and regularly did, destroy an entire street, an entire district, sometimes an entire town. London burned repeatedly. Rouen burned. Every major medieval city had a fire story, and the curfew was the community's attempt to contain the risk by removing the fuel. But the effect of curfew went beyond fire safety. It was an economic boundary. When the bell rang, your productive day ended. You could not work by firelight after curfew because you could not have a fire. You could not read. You could not cook. You could not do anything that required seeing clearly. The bell did not just cover the fire. It covered the economy. Everything after curfew happened in the dark, and the dark was where sleep lived. Not because people were tired at 8 in the evening, though physical labor certainly helped, but because staying awake without light was an activity with no obvious purpose and no economic return. You leave a lamp on in a room you are not using. You turn on the bathroom light to check your phone. You open the refrigerator at midnight and stand in its glow eating leftover pasta directly from the container. And the light that makes all of this possible costs you so little that your electricity bill does not even itemize it. Every single one of those rooms, lit for a few idle minutes, would have represented a medieval household's entire evening light budget spent on nothing. The most wasteful thing you do every day, the light you leave burning in the hallway because you cannot be bothered to walk 3 steps to the switch, would have bankrupted a medieval family in a week. And so darkness it was, total, heavy, honest darkness, settling over the house like a wool blanket, pressing in through the shuttered window, and the gaps in the door, and the space where the chimney met the thatch. And in that darkness, somewhere around midnight, the church bell would ring once for matins, and you would open your eyes, and the waking hour would begin. You have been here before, earlier in this story, when we first talked about biphasic sleep. But now you are inside the watch itself, lying in the dark, awake on purpose. And the question of what you actually do with this hour deserves a longer answer than the one we gave you then. The first thing you notice is the quiet, not silence. Medieval nights were not silent. The house creaks and settles around you. Wind pushes against the shutters. An animal moves outside. A dog, a cow shifting in its pen, something smaller rustling through the thatch. The embers in the hearth tick as they cool. The people lying next to you breathe in rhythms that are almost but not quite synchronized, and the effect is a soft, irregular percussion that fills the room without breaking the stillness. This is not the quiet of noise cancellation. It is the quiet of a world that has genuinely stopped making noise, and your modern ears, accustomed to the hum of refrigerators and the distant drone of traffic and the 60 hertz buzz of electricity running through walls, have never heard anything like it. In this quiet, you pray, not because you are especially devout, although you might be, but because the Church has specifically designated this hour for prayer and has provided you with the material to do it. Prayer manuals from the 13th and 14th centuries include prayers written for the watch. They are short, repetitive, meditative. They are designed to be spoken in the dark by someone who is calm and warm and half asleep, and their rhythm is closer to a modern guided meditation than to the formal liturgy of a Sunday Mass. You murmur the words into the dark, and the words have the same cadence they had last night, and the night before that, and every night you can remember, and the repetition is the point. It is a ritual that marks time, fills the quiet, and gives structure to an hour that might otherwise feel shapeless. If you are not praying, you might eat a piece of bread left on the shelf beside the bed, a cup of ale that has been sitting since evening, warm now and slightly flat. The midnight snack is not a modern invention born of refrigerators and boredom. It is an ancient custom with its own place in the rhythm of the night. You eat in the dark, by feel, the bread rough against your fingers, the ale sour and familiar, and the act of eating is companionable even when nobody speaks. You might talk, quietly, with the person next to you, in the low, unguarded way people talk when they are warm and tired and the world outside has gone away. Conversations during the watch had a quality that daytime conversations could not match. The work was done. The children were asleep. The day's demands had been met or failed, and either way, the reckoning was postponed until morning. What remained was the rare, soft luxury of lying in the dark with nothing to do and no one watching, and a few minutes to say the things that the noise of the day had crowded out. And you might, as the medical texts note with frank practicality, make love. Physicians recommended the watch as the most auspicious time for conception. The body was warm from the first sleep. The humors were balanced. The mind was calm and receptive. This was not romantic advice. It was medical prescription, delivered with the same clinical seriousness as a recommendation to eat more leafy greens. The watch was when your body was best prepared for the act, and the act performed during the watch was most likely to produce a child. Every modern fertility clinic telling couples to relax and stop stressing about timing is offering a version of advice that medieval physicians gave 600 years ago, except the medieval version came with a built-in window of calm, dark, unhurried time that the modern world has entirely eliminated. The watch lasted roughly an hour, sometimes a little longer in winter, when the nights were longer and the darkness had more space to fill. Then, gradually, naturally, without an alarm or a decision, you fell back to sleep. The second sleep carried you through to dawn, and it was considered the deeper, more restful half of the night. The first sleep cleared the mind. The watch gave you time to be human. The second sleep did the real work of restoration. Every modern sleep expert telling you that waking in the middle of the night is a sign of poor sleep hygiene, that you should avoid screens and caffeine, and practice your breathing exercises, and buy a better pillow, is asking you to solve a problem that your body does not think is a problem. Your body remembers the watch. It remembers the quiet hour in the dark. And every time you wake at 2 a.m, feeling alert and calm, and unable to explain why you are not tired, your body is offering you a gift from the 14th century that the modern world has told you to refuse. The watch is over now. The second sleep is pulling you back under. But before you close your eyes, there is the matter of how you are lying, because in this world, the position of your body during sleep is not a matter of personal comfort. It is a matter of medical science. spiritual safety, and the eternal fate of your soul. You are supposed to sleep on your right side. This is not a suggestion. Medical texts from the 13th and 14th centuries are specific and consistent on this point. The heart sits on the left side of the body. Sleeping on the left compresses the heart, which disrupts its function, which unbalances the humors, which leads to troubled sleep, dark dreams, and illness. The right side keeps the heart free, allows blood to flow properly, and produces the calm, even temperament that the body requires for restorative rest. You lie on your right side with your legs slightly bent and your head elevated on the bolster, and this is the position you hold as sleep takes you. Sleeping on your stomach is worse than sleeping on the left side. It is actively dangerous. The weight of the body pressing down on the internal organs was believed to generate heat, which produced excess bile, which caused nightmares and lustful dreams. The church had its own concerns about prone sleeping that overlapped with, but went beyond the medical reasoning. Lying face down was associated with carnality, with the body pressing against the bed in a posture that suggested and potentially provoked sinful thoughts. A person who habitually slept on their stomach was courting both physical illness and spiritual danger, and the correction for this was not a more comfortable pillow. It was confession. Before you lie down at all, you prepare the bed spiritually. You make the sign of the cross. You might sprinkle holy water on the linens, if you have any, if the parish priest has blessed some for you, and you have carried it home in a small vessel. You say the night prayer, which asks God to protect you through the vulnerable hours when your soul is less guarded and the forces that wish you harm are more active. Sleep was not a neutral state. It was a period of spiritual exposure. Your waking mind could resist temptation, could choose virtue, could exercise the rational faculty that separated you from animals. Your sleeping mind could do none of these things. It was open, undefended, subject to whatever visions and influences the night chose to send. And the night, in medieval theology, was not empty. It was populated. The prayers you said before closing your eyes were not rituals of comfort. They were petitions for protection, spoken by a person who believed, with complete sincerity, that the dark contained things that meant them harm. You have arranged your body on the correct side, spoken the correct words, made the correct signs. The straw rustles as you settle. The wool blanket is heavy across your shoulder. The person beside you has been asleep for several minutes already, their breathing slow and steady and close. The fire is down to its last embers, a faint orange glow on the far wall that shrinks as you watch it. And then it is gone, and the dark is complete, and the second sleep takes you. You will not wake until dawn, but when you do, you will not be in this bed. You will be somewhere else, somewhere far less safe, sharing a mattress with someone you have never met, in a building that charges you for the privilege. The inn smells like wood smoke, spilled ale, wet wool, and the accumulated body heat of roughly 20 people who have been traveling on foot for days. You are standing in the main hall, which serves as dining room, drinking room, and for those who cannot afford a bed, sleeping room. The floor is packed earth, covered with rushes that were fresh at some point this month. A fire burns in the central hearth, the smoke rising toward a hole in the roof that is doing approximately half of its job. The innkeeper is a broad woman with a voice that carries across the room without effort, and she is currently explaining your options for the night with the brisk efficiency of someone who has had this conversation 4,000 times. You can sleep in the hall. This is the cheapest option. You pay a halfpenny. You get a spot on the floor near the fire. You supply your own cloak or blanket, and you sleep among the other travelers who have made the same calculation. The floor is hard. The rushes are thin, and the person next to you is a stranger who may or may not be trustworthy, but the fire is warm, and the roof does not leak, and for a halfpenny, you are not sleeping in a ditch. You can have a bed. This costs a penny, sometimes more, and the word bed here means a space in a bed, not a bed to yourself. The inn has beds upstairs, each one large enough for 2 or 3 people. and the innkeeper fills them the way a modern airline fills seats. You are assigned a position based on when you arrived and how much you paid. The bed has a straw mattress, a wool blanket, and a bolster shared across its width. The person next to you arrived an hour ago from a different town, heading in a different direction, and you will never see them again after tomorrow morning. You do not know their name. You do not need to. You are sharing a piece of furniture, not a life. The expensive option, available at better inns along major routes, is a private bed. This costs 4 pence or more, roughly 2 full days of labor for an unskilled worker. For that price, you get a bed to yourself, possibly in a smaller room, possibly with a door that closes. This is a luxury that most travelers have never considered, and would not consider. Paying 4 times the standard rate to avoid sharing a bed would strike the average medieval traveler as an eccentric waste of money, the way paying for a first-class airline ticket strikes most modern travelers as something other people do. The economics of the inn run on a simple principle. The innkeeper profits by selling the same bed multiple times. 1 bed slept in by 3 travelers generates 3 pennies. 1 bed slept in by 1 traveler generates 1 penny, or 4 if they are paying the private rate. The incentive is obvious. Pack the beds. Fill the hall. Maximize the revenue per mattress. The travelers carry all the risk. Theft is the primary danger, and it is common enough to appear regularly in court records. The most frequent crime at medieval inns was a bedmate stealing from a sleeping companion. Purses, knives, clothing, boots. Anything portable, anything valuable, anything that could be taken in the dark without waking the person it belonged to. Experienced travelers slept on their purses, literally on them. The money bag went under the body, pressed between the sleeper and the mattress, where it could not be removed without waking its owner. Knives were kept close. Boots were used as pillows or tucked between the legs. The wall side of the bed was negotiated, not assigned, and the traveler, with the most to lose, argued for the position where they could not be reached from the open side of the room. These were not precautions born of paranoia. They were standard practice, the medieval equivalent of locking your car doors in a parking garage. Everyone did it. Everyone understood why. The inn was obligated to provide clean straw in the mattresses and to change the bedding between guests. This obligation was frequently ignored. The straw was old. The blankets carried the warmth and the smell, and the passengers of the last dozen travelers who had used them. The bedbugs in an inn mattress were cosmopolitan creatures, fed by a rotating international buffet of pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, and wandering laborers, and they were among the most well-nourished insects in the medieval world. None of this made the inn unpopular. It made the inn normal. The concept of a private hotel room, a sealed space with a lock and a bed for 1 or 2 people, and a bathroom attached, did not emerge until the 18th century. Before that invention, sleeping at an inn meant sleeping in company, and the company was whatever the road had delivered that night. You lay down next to a stranger, you kept your hand on your purse, you listened to unfamiliar breathing in the dark, and you slept, because the alternative was sleeping outside, and outside had wolves. The inn is behind you now. You are back in your own bed, in your own house, with your own family breathing beside you, and the straw is familiar, and the blanket smells like home, and the dark is the same dark it always is. But tonight, something is different. Tonight, you cannot sleep. Your eyes are open in the blackness. Your body is tired, but your mind will not settle. The day's worries circle and refuse to land. The grain is running low. The rent is due. The cough your youngest has had for a week is not getting better. You lie on your right side as the physicians instruct, and you have said the prayers, and you have covered your head, and you have done everything correctly, and still sleep will not come. You need help. And help, in the medieval world, comes in a clay cup from the shelf above the hearth. The simplest remedy is warm ale. You drink it before bed, or during the watch, if sleep will not return for the second half of the night. The ale is weak, brewed at home, slightly sour, body temperature by the time you drink it. It is not medicine. It is comfort in liquid form. The same way a cup of chamomile tea at 11 at night is not medicine for a modern person, but feels like it should be. The act of drinking something warm in the dark, slowly, deliberately, is itself a ritual of settling, and the ritual may matter more than the ingredients. But if warm ale is not enough, the medieval pharmacopoeia has options. Valerian root has been prescribed for sleeplessness since at least the 2nd century, and it is still sold in every pharmacy and health food shop you have ever walked past. Chamomile, steeped in hot water or mixed into ale, was recommended by herbalists across Europe. Lettuce was considered a powerful soporific, and this was not entirely wrong. Wild lettuce contains lacticarium, a milky substance that modern chemistry has confirmed possesses mild sedative properties. A medieval herbalist prescribing lettuce water for insomnia was practicing evidence-based medicine without the vocabulary to describe it that way. The more adventurous remedies push further. The sleep apple was a small ball of herbs, sometimes wax, sometimes cloth, held under the nose to deliver soothing vapors directly to the brain. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess, physician, and composer, recommended warm baths before bed and sleeping in a cool room with fresh air from an open window. She also recommended specific herbal preparations involving poppy, mandrake, and henbane, which were effective in the way that a sledgehammer is effective at hanging a picture. They worked. They also carried the risk of never waking up. The most dangerous sleep aid in the medieval toolkit was dwale, a preparation that blurred the line between sedative and anesthetic. Recipes varied, but the common ingredients included opium from poppies, hemlock, henbane, and sometimes mandrake root, mixed with wine or ale, and administered in careful doses. Careful being a relative term in a world without standardized measurements or controlled dosing. Dwale was used for surgery, for intractable pain, and for sleep, so stubborn that no gentler remedy could touch it. It was effective and occasionally fatal, which is a combination the medieval pharmacist accepted with a pragmatism that modern regulatory agencies would find troubling. The Church had its own complicated relationship with sleep remedies. Sleep was necessary, ordained by God, part of the natural order. But sleep was also associated with sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins, and the deliberate pursuit of sleep through artificial means sat in an uncomfortable gray area. Were you seeking rest that your body needed, or were you indulging a weakness that your soul should overcome through discipline and prayer? The answer depended on who you asked and how much pain you were in, which is not so different from the modern debate about sleeping pills. You buy a 30-pound weighted blanket because an advertisement told you it reduces anxiety. A medieval physician prescribed heavy bed covers for restless humors. You download a sleep app that plays rain sounds and ocean waves. A medieval herbalist prepared a sachet of dried lavender and chamomile to place beneath the bolster. You take a melatonin gummy manufactured in a facility that also produces vitamins shaped like cartoon bears. A medieval apothecary mixed valerian root into warm ale and handed it across the counter with the same reassuring confidence. The desperation has not changed. The willingness to pay for a solution has not changed. The gap between what works and what we hope works has not changed. 600 years of medical progress, and the human race is still lying in the dark at 1 a.m. thinking, please, please, just let me fall asleep. The valerian works, or the ale works, or the exhaustion finally wins, and sleep arrives. And with sleep come dreams. And dreams, in this world, are not the harmless neural housekeeping that modern science describes. Dreams are messages. They come from somewhere, and the somewhere matters enormously. And the wrong dream on the wrong night can follow you into the morning and all the way to the confessional. The medieval church recognized 3 possible sources for dreams. The first was God. A dream sent by God was a divine communication, a vision, a revelation. These were rare, sacred, and to be treated with reverence. The biblical tradition was full of them. Joseph, interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. Daniel, reading the writing on the wall. The angel appearing to Joseph in a dream to warn him about Herod. God spoke through dreams, and a dream from God could change the course of a life or a kingdom. The second source was the devil. A demonic dream was a temptation, a deception, a spiritual attack launched against the sleeper during the hours when the rational mind was offline and the soul was undefended. These dreams were vivid, seductive, frightening, or confusing, and their purpose was to lead the dreamer toward sin, despair, or false belief. The church took demonic dreams seriously. A person who reported a recurring, disturbing, or sexually charged dream might be counseled, assigned penance, or in extreme cases, investigated for signs of demonic influence. The third source was the body itself. A natural dream was produced by digestion, by the humors, by whatever you ate before bed or whatever physical state your body was in when you fell asleep. Eating too much red meat produced hot, aggressive dreams. Drinking too much ale produced confused, muddled dreams. An imbalance of black bile produced melancholic dreams full of darkness and loss. These dreams were medically significant, but spiritually neutral. They told you something about your body, not about your soul. The challenge, and it was a genuine intellectual challenge that occupied theologians for centuries, was telling the three apart. A vivid dream about flying. Was it God showing you the freedom of the Spirit? Was it the devil tempting you with pride? Was it the cheese you ate at supper? The church never fully resolved this question, which meant that every dreamer faced the same anxious morning calculation. What did I dream, and what does it mean, and should I be worried? Dream manuals helped, or tried to. The Somnial Danielis, attributed to the prophet Daniel, was the most widely copied and circulated dream interpretation guide in medieval Europe. It survived in hundreds of manuscript copies across every European language, which tells you how desperate the demand was. The entries were specific and categorical. Dreaming of fish meant pregnancy or financial gain. Dreaming of bread meant prosperity. Dreaming of teeth falling out meant the death of a relative. Dreaming of flying meant ambition, possibly dangerous ambition. Dreaming of water meant emotional turmoil. Dreaming of a dog meant loyalty or betrayal, depending on whether the dog was friendly. You Google, what does it mean when you dream about your teeth falling out at 3 a.m, sitting up in bed with your phone casting blue light across the ceiling? A medieval person asked their priest the same question at dawn, standing in the nave of the parish church, with their hands clasped and their face tight with worry. You get a listicle and a targeted advertisement for a dental plan. They got a theological assessment and possibly a penance. The question has not changed. The anxiety has not changed. The complete absence of a satisfying answer has not changed. The church's most fraught dream category was the nocturnal emission. A man who experienced a sexual dream, followed by a physical release, faced a genuine theological puzzle. Had he sinned? The act occurred during sleep, when the will was suspended and the rational faculty was absent. Augustine argued that the dreamer could not be held fully responsible for what happened during a state in which moral agency was diminished. But other theologians were less forgiving. If the dream was provoked by lustful thoughts before sleep, or by looking at a woman during the day, or by eating foods that heated the blood, then the dreamer bore some responsibility for creating the conditions that led to the dream. The result was that a man who had a sexual dream might need to confess it, not because the dream itself was a sin, but because the life that produced the dream might contain sins that needed examining. You are lying in the dark again, the second sleep approaching, the day's final prayer spoken, the body arranged correctly on the right side, the nightcap snug, the blanket heavy. And as the dreams begin to gather at the edges of your consciousness, you carry with you the knowledge that what you see behind your closed eyes tonight might require an explanation tomorrow. Sleep, in this world, is never entirely safe. It is always a small surrender, a nightly agreement to give up control and trust that the morning will return you to yourself unchanged. Most nights it does, but the prayers exist because some nights, in the theology of this world, it might not. And beyond the dreams, beyond the prayers, beyond the thin wall of your house, the night itself is busy with people who are not sleeping at all. The night belongs to you, the sleeper, but it does not belong to you alone. While you lie in the dark with your prayers spoken and your dreams forming, an entire parallel world is awake and working. The medieval night had its own economy, its own labor force, and its own set of rules, and the people who operated inside it lived on a schedule that would make a modern shift worker wince. The baker is the first one up. In towns of any size, the baker's day begins at 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes earlier, because bread must be ready by dawn, and bread does not hurry. The oven takes time to heat. The dough, mixed and shaped the evening before, needs its final rise. The baking itself takes time, and then the loaves need to cool enough to sell, and the first customers arrive at first light, expecting bread the way a modern commuter expects coffee, hot, fresh, and available without discussion. The baker works through your entire second sleep, and has been working for hours by the time you open your eyes. The warmth of the bakehouse in winter, the glow of the oven in the pre-dawn dark, the smell of bread drifting through the streets before sunrise. These are the sensory markers of a medieval morning, and they are produced by a person who has not slept since midnight. The night watchman is out there too. In any town large enough to have walls and gates, the watch is a formal institution, staffed by paid or conscripted men who walk the streets from curfew to dawn. The watchman carries a lantern and a staff, and sometimes a horn or a bell, and his job is to call the hours, report the weather, spot fires before they spread, and challenge anyone moving through the streets without a light or a legitimate reason. The cry of the watchman, shouted at regular intervals through the night, is one of the defining sounds of a medieval town after dark. 12 of the clock, and all is well. A clear night and a cold wind. 3 of the clock, and the watch is set. These calls served a practical function, telling the sleeping town what time it was and confirming that someone was paying attention, but they also served an emotional one. The voice of the watchman in the dark was a reminder that the night was supervised, that someone was awake so you did not have to be. The monks are awake at midnight. The monastic night office, matins, requires the entire community to rise from their beds, file into the church, and sing the psalms in the cold dark of the nave. This is not optional. It is the central obligation of the Benedictine rule, the act that separates the monastic life from every other form of Christian existence. While the rest of the world sleeps, or tends to earthly business during the watch, the monks pray. They are the night shift of the medieval church, maintaining a continuous stream of worship that covers the hours when ordinary Christians are unconscious and spiritually vulnerable. The sound of monastic chanting drifting across the fields at midnight, faint and strange and persistent, is a sound that villagers living near abbeys knew as well as they knew birdsong. It was part of the night. It was the night's own music. Midwives worked when the baby decided to arrive, which was frequently at night, because labor has never consulted a clock. A midwife called to a delivery at 2 in the morning walked through dark streets carrying a rushlight or no light at all, navigating by memory and by the sound of someone shouting her name from a doorway. She worked in a room lit by whatever the household could afford, attended a birth that could last hours or minutes, and walked home in the gray light of early dawn, knowing that tonight or tomorrow night the same thing might happen again. The midwife's sleep was the most interrupted sleep in the village, more broken than the watchman's, more unpredictable than the baker's, and compensated with a fee that was modest, and sometimes paid in bread or eggs instead of money. And then there were the people who worked the night, because the night was where their work lived. Prostitution operated after curfew in designated areas of medieval towns, tolerated by civic authorities, who considered it a necessary evil that prevented worse sins. The women who worked these streets slept during the day, lived on a reversed schedule, and occupied a social position that was simultaneously condemned by the church, regulated by the town, and patronized by the same men who sat in the pews on Sunday morning. The medieval night had its own moral geography, and the people who inhabited it were both essential to its economy and invisible in its respectable daylight. All of these people, the baker, the watchman, the monk, the midwife, the woman on the corner, shared one thing. They knew the night in a way you did not. They knew its sounds, its temperatures, its shifting quality of darkness from deep black at midnight to the faintly lighter gray that arrives an hour before dawn. They knew what the air tasted like at 3 in the morning, and how the silence changed texture as the town stirred in the last hour before sunrise. You slept through their world every single night, and their world made your morning possible. But before we leave the night workers behind, there is one bed in this world that operates under more rules, more scrutiny, and more official witnesses than any other. It is the bed you sleep in on the most important night of your life, and the number of people watching you get into it might surprise you. The marriage bed was not a private space. It was a legal instrument. The church taught that a marriage was not fully valid until it was consummated, and consummation meant sexual intercourse in the marriage bed on the wedding night. This was not a theological abstraction. It was a practical requirement with real consequences. An unconsummated marriage could be annulled. A disputed consummation could end up in an ecclesiastical court. The bed was where the contract was sealed, and in many cases, the sealing had witnesses. The bedding ceremony was a formal event in medieval weddings, particularly among the nobility and the wealthier merchant class. After the feast, the couple was escorted to the bedchamber by the wedding guests, the priest, and sometimes the entire household. The priest blessed the bed. Prayers were said over the couple. The bride and groom were helped into the bed, sometimes undressed by attendants, sometimes symbolically tucked in. The guests remained in the room until the couple was settled, and in some traditions, witnesses stayed nearby or even in the room to confirm that the marriage had been consummated. The door might be left ajar. The evidence might be inspected in the morning. This was not prurience. This was contract law, conducted in linen. Among royalty, the stakes were higher, and the scrutiny more intense. A royal marriage that was not consummated could threaten alliances, destabilize successions, and provoke wars. The bedding of a royal couple was a diplomatic event attended by courtiers, bishops, and ambassadors who needed to report back to their own monarchs that the union was, in every legally relevant sense, complete. The marriage bed of a king was the least private bed in the kingdom. Every political alliance in Europe had an interest in what happened in it. The church also regulated what happened in the marriage bed after the wedding night, and the regulations were extensive. Married couples were forbidden from having sexual relations during Lent, during Advent, on Sundays, on Wednesdays, on Fridays, on feast days, on the vigils of feast days, and during the wife's menstruation. Added together, these prohibitions eliminated roughly half the nights of the year. The marriage bed, that expensive, carefully constructed, legally witnessed piece of furniture, sat in the middle of a web of rules so dense that a conscientious medieval couple would need a calendar and a priest to determine whether tonight was permitted. Whether most people actually followed these rules is a question the historical record answers with a quiet, consistent no. Birth records show children conceived in every month of the year, including the months that fell entirely within Lent. The church preached restraint. The laity nodded respectfully, and then closed the bedroom door, and did what married people have always done, which is make their own decisions about their own bodies in their own bed. The gap between the church's rules about sex and the laity's actual behavior is one of the most consistent features of medieval life, and it is as wide as the gap between modern dietary guidelines and what modern people actually eat for dinner. Your modern bedroom has no witnesses, no priest, no calendar of forbidden nights. But the anxiety about what happens in the bed, the negotiation between desire and propriety, the gap between what authorities say you should do and what you actually do in the dark, all of that is ancient and unchanged. The bedding ceremony is gone. The performance is not. The night is wearing on. You are deep in the second sleep now, or nearly so, and the body is doing what the body does during long hours in the dark. At some point between midnight and dawn, you will need to deal with a problem that every human being in every century has faced in the middle of the night. And the medieval solution is sitting on the floor beside the bed, waiting for you. The chamber pot is a wide, shallow ceramic vessel, sometimes metal if the household has money. And it lives in the bedroom because the alternative is worse in every possible way. There is no bathroom, there is no plumbing, there is no hallway light to guide you. There is darkness and cold, and a floor that might be packed earth or rough timber, and is definitely not clean. And somewhere outside is a privy that is essentially a plank with a hole over a pit. And the walk from the bed to the privy, in the middle of a winter night, naked, barefoot, in total darkness, is an experience that makes the chamber pot seem like the most civilized invention in human history. You use the pot by feel. You know where it is because it is always in the same place, beside the bed, within arm's reach. You do what you need to do. The sound is loud in the quiet room, and nobody mentions it because everyone has done the same thing or will do it before morning. The pot stays where it is until daylight. In a townhouse with an upper story, the morning emptying is performed through the window, the contents tossed into the street below, with a shouted warning to anyone walking beneath. The phrase "gardez l'eau," or its abbreviated form "loo," may or may not be the origin of the modern English word for toilet. Etymologists argue about this. The practice itself is not in dispute. The streets of a medieval town in the early morning were not safe for the distracted pedestrian. Wealthier households had the garderobe, a small chamber built into the thickness of a castle or manor wall, with a stone seat over a shaft that dropped to the outside of the building or into a cesspit below. The garderobe was private, which was its luxury. It was also cold, exposed to outside air through the shaft, and located as far from the main bedchamber as the architecture allowed, which meant a long walk through dark corridors in the middle of the night. The name garderobe means wardrobe, and clothes were sometimes stored in the chamber because the ammonia fumes rising from below were believed to kill moths and fleas. This may have been true. It was certainly unpleasant. Your bathroom is 6 steps from your bed. It has a light switch, a porcelain fixture connected to a sewage system, a roll of paper that you did not manufacture yourself, and a door that closes. You use it without thinking. You flush. You walk back to bed. The entire transaction takes 90 seconds and involves no shouting, no ceramic vessels, no risk to pedestrians, and no ammonia. Every single one of those comforts is the product of centuries of engineering, infrastructure, and public investment that the person lying in that medieval bed could not have imagined. And yet, the basic problem, the biological reality of a body that does not pause its functions for the convenience of sleep, is identical. The solutions have changed. The 3 in the morning urgency has not. The pot has been used. The room has settled. The dark has absorbed the small disruption and returned to its deep, steady weight. And beyond the house, beyond the street, beyond the town walls, there is another world of sleepers whose nights look nothing like yours. Stone walls instead of timber, candles that never go out, and a schedule of sleep so ruthlessly interrupted, so deliberately uncomfortable, so precisely engineered to prevent rest from becoming pleasure, that it makes your straw mattress and your flea-bitten blanket feel like paradise. The monastery bell rings at midnight, and you are on your feet before you are fully awake. This is not the gentle surfacing of the watch, the slow drift into wakefulness that the peasant household enjoys between first sleep and second sleep. This is a summons. The bell means matins, the night office, and matins does not wait for you to feel ready. You swing your legs off the narrow wooden bed, your feet hitting the cold stone floor, and you are already moving toward the church, because the rule says you will be there, and the rule does not have a snooze button. You are a Benedictine monk, and the rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century and followed with varying degrees of strictness for the next 1,000 years, governs every hour of your existence, including the ones you spend asleep. The rule specifies when you go to bed. After Compline, the final prayer service of the day, performed at sunset or shortly after. The rule specifies when you wake. For matins, at midnight or shortly after, depending on the season. The rule specifies what you wear to bed, your clothes, your full monastic habit, including your belt, so that you are dressed and ready to move the moment the bell sounds. The rule specifies how you sleep. In individual beds, in a common dormitory, with a candle burning all night, the doors remain open. A senior monk supervises. Every detail of this arrangement is engineered toward a single purpose: the prevention of sin. The individual beds prevent the physical proximity that a shared bed might encourage. The burning candle prevents the cover of darkness. The open doors prevent secrecy. The supervision prevents anything that the other measures might have missed. The clothing prevents the vulnerability and the temptation of nakedness. The belt, specifically mentioned in the rule, prevents the clothing from being easily removed. The monastic dormitory is a sleeping environment designed by someone who thought very carefully about everything that could go wrong when human beings lie down in the dark together, and then built a system to prevent all of it. The result is that monks had, by a comfortable margin, the worst sleep in the medieval world. The peasant slept naked, warm, beside family, in a dark room, undisturbed until the matins bell. The monk slept clothed, alone, in a lit room, under observation, and was woken after approximately 4 hours for a service that lasted between 1 and 2 hours, depending on the liturgical calendar. After matins, the monk returned to bed for a second sleep that was shorter than the peasant's, because lauds, the dawn service, arrived with first light. In summer, when dawn came early, the monk might get 2 hours of second sleep. In winter, perhaps 3 or 4. The total was never generous, and the interruption was never optional. The church at midnight is cold. The stone holds the chill of the day's absence and releases it slowly into the air, and the monk's breath clouds in the candlelight as they file into their stalls. The singing begins. The psalms are chanted in a low, steady rhythm that fills the nave and echoes off the vaulting, and the sound is unlike anything the secular world produces. It is not music meant to entertain or to move the emotions. It is music meant to mark time, to fill the darkness with ordered sound, to maintain the thread of worship through the hours when the rest of the Christian world is silent. The monks sing because someone must always be singing, the way someone must always be watching. The prayer never stops. The night office is the shift that covers the gap. Some monks fell asleep during matins. The records are honest about this. Monastic chronicles mention brothers nodding off in their stalls, heads drooping over their psalters, snoring gently while the community chanted around them. The punishments for sleeping during the office varied by house and by era, ranging from a sharp tap on the shoulder to public penance to being assigned the least desirable chores for a week. The struggle against sleep during matins was one of the defining daily battles of monastic life, fought every night for years, sometimes decades, by men who had chosen this life voluntarily and who understood the bell at midnight as the price of their vocation. The holiest sleepers in the medieval world slept the worst. The people closest to God, by their own theology, were the most deprived of rest, and the peasant, lying in the dark on a straw mattress full of fleas, naked, warm, surrounded by family, sleeping in 2 generous shifts with a quiet hour of freedom between them, had a better night than any monk in Christendom. Status, in the realm of sleep, ran precisely backward. You leave the monastery now, stepping out through the gate and onto the road, and the road is where the next kind of sleeper lives, or rather, does not live. The road is where sleep happens to you, wherever you happen to stop, with whatever you happen to be carrying, and the comfort level drops off a cliff. If you are a pilgrim, you are walking. For days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, depending on where you started and which shrine you are heading toward. Canterbury, from London, is a few days. Santiago de Compostela, from Paris, is several weeks. Rome, from northern England, is months. You carry what you can. A cloak, a staff, a scrip, which is a leather bag for food and small possessions, and a broad-brimmed hat that keeps the rain off your face and identifies you to other travelers as a pilgrim, which affords you certain legal protections and certain charitable accommodations along the way. The pilgrim hostel system along major routes provided basic sleeping facilities, usually a large communal room with straw pallets on the floor, a fire, and a meal. These hostels were funded by charitable donations, maintained by religious orders, and free, or nearly free, to pilgrims who could prove their status. The quality varied enormously. Some hostels were clean, well-managed, and staffed by lay brothers who took genuine pride in the hospitality. Others were filthy, overcrowded, and indistinguishable from the worst inns on the road. You took what was available, and you were grateful, because the alternative was the alternative. The alternative was sleeping outside. Under a hedge, in a barn, if the farmer allowed it, in the porch of a church, if the priest did not chase you off, on the ground beside the road, wrapped in your cloak, which was your blanket, your ground sheet, your rain cover, and your only insulation against a night that could drop below freezing in spring and autumn. The medieval traveler's cloak was the single most important piece of equipment they owned, more valuable than the staff, more essential than the scrip. It was heavy wool, sometimes lined with fur, large enough to wrap around the entire body, and it was the difference between a cold, uncomfortable night and a dangerous one. A pilgrim without a cloak on a cold night was a pilgrim at genuine risk. You slept in your clothes, which you had also been walking in for the past 12 hours. You slept with your scrip under your body, for the same reasons the inn traveler slept on their purse. You slept lightly, because the road at night was not safe. Wolves were real, present, and active in medieval Europe in numbers that modern rewilding programs are only beginning to approach. Outlaws operated on roads between towns, particularly on stretches that passed through forest. The pilgrim was a tempting target, traveling alone or in small groups, carrying money for the journey, and identifiable by the hat and the staff. The sounds of sleeping outdoors on a medieval road, wind in trees, the distant bark of a fox, running water if you were near a stream, which was both a comfort and a hazard because streams attracted animals. The creak of branches, the rustle of something moving through undergrowth that might be a hedgehog and might be something larger, and above everything, the absolute, overwhelming, staggering quantity of stars in a sky unpolluted by a single electric light for 1,000 miles in every direction. A medieval traveler sleeping on their back, cloak wrapped tight, looking up at the night sky, saw the Milky Way with a clarity and a density that almost no modern human has ever experienced. The galaxy, their galaxy, your galaxy, a smear of light so thick and bright it cast faint shadows on the ground. They did not know what it was. They called it the Way of St. James, or the Road to Rome, or 100 other names in 100 languages, but they saw it every clear night of their lives, and you, lying in your modern bed in your modern city, have probably never seen it at all. You come back from the road now, back through the town gate, back past the watchman, back into the house, back to the bed, and you are not the only one settling in. The dog is already on the bed. This is not a transgression. This is normal. The medieval household dog was not a pet in the modern sense of a creature whose primary function is emotional companionship. The dog was a worker. It guarded the house. It controlled rats. It alerted the sleeping household to intruders, to fire, to anything moving outside the door that should not have been moving. And at night, the dog slept where it was most useful, which was near the people it was guarding, which was frequently on or against the bed. The warmth of a dog was a genuine asset in an unheated room. A large dog lying against your back or across your feet produced heat that the blanket alone could not match. And on a winter night, the difference between sleeping with a dog and sleeping without one was the difference between shivering and not shivering. The phrase, three-dog night, meaning a night so cold you needed 3 dogs in the bed to stay warm, entered the English language for a reason. The dogs were not uninvited. They were recruited. The cat was there for mice. Every medieval household that stored grain, which was most of them, kept a cat, and the cat operated on its own schedule with the supreme indifference to human preferences that cats have maintained consistently across every century of recorded history. The cat hunted at night, which meant that your sleep might be interrupted by the sound of a brief, violent altercation between a cat and a mouse somewhere in the dark corner of the room, followed by a silence that meant the cat had won, followed by the cat returning to the bed with the self-satisfied weight of an animal that considers its work complete and your gratitude irrelevant. In many peasant households, especially in colder climates and in the earlier medieval centuries, the animals were not in a separate building at all. The longhouse, common across northern Europe, was a single structure divided by a low partition. Humans lived at one end, livestock lived at the other. Cattle, pigs, sometimes goats, sometimes chickens, all under the same roof, breathing the same air, contributing their body heat to the overall temperature of the space. The partition was low enough that the smell crossed it freely, and the sound of animals shifting, chewing, lowing, and doing what animals do during the night was a permanent part of the bedroom soundscape. This was not squalor. This was architecture. The animals generated heat that rose and spread through the shared space, and on a night when the temperature outside dropped below freezing, the warmth of 6 cattle on the other side of a low wall was the difference between a cold house and an endurable one. The modern separation of living space and animal space, the idea that animals belong outside and humans belong inside, and the two categories should never share a roof, is a product of wealth, not of hygiene standards. When you could afford to build a separate barn, you built a separate barn. When you could not, you shared, and the sharing had its own rough comfort. The sounds of a medieval household settling into sleep, the dog sighing as it lays its head on your ankle, the cat moving across the room with the precise, silent footsteps of an animal that has not changed its hunting technique in 10,000 years. The cattle shifting behind the partition, the heavy sound of a large body adjusting its weight on straw, a chicken murmuring, which is a sound that only people who have lived near chickens know, a low, soft, rhythmic clucking that sounds like a conversation with no words, the fire in the hearth crackling and ticking as it settles, the wind testing the shutters, the people beside you breathing, each breath slightly different, each rhythm slightly offset from the next, the whole room a slow, layered percussion of living things existing in the same warm, dark space. You close your eyes. The dog's warmth spreads up through the blanket. The sounds soften and blur. The world outside the walls is dark and cold and dangerous, and busy with wolves and watchmen and monks singing psalms in frozen churches. But inside, in here, the bed is full, and the room is warm, and the night is holding you in the rough, imperfect, thoroughly alive embrace of a world that has not yet learned to sleep alone. And that world, warm as it is, still has to survive until morning, because the dark outside is not empty, and the things that live in it, real and imagined, are the reason your ancestors said their prayers so carefully before they closed their eyes. The town gate closed at sunset, and it did not open again until dawn. This was not a precaution. It was policy. The gate was the boundary between the ordered world of the town, where laws applied and watchmen patrolled, and fires were covered at curfew, and the disordered world of the countryside after dark, where none of those things were guaranteed. When the gate swung shut and the bar dropped into place, the town became an island, sealed for the night, and the people inside it were in the care of the watch. The watch was organized differently in every town. but the principle was consistent. A small group of men, sometimes paid, sometimes conscripted on a rotating basis from the citizenry, walked the streets from curfew to dawn. They carried lanterns, they carried staffs or short weapons. They called the hours at regular intervals so that the sleeping town could track the passage of the night without opening a shutter. They were the eyes and ears of a community that had gone blind and deaf the moment the sun went down, and the quality of their attention was the difference between a town that survived the night and a town that burned. Fire was the primary fear, and it was a rational one. A town built of timber and thatch, with cooking fires in every house and candles in every room that could afford them, lived in a permanent state of combustion risk. A fire that started at midnight in a sleeping household could consume a street before the first person woke to shout. The watchman's most critical function was to smell smoke before it became flame, to see the glow of an uncontrolled fire before it found the next wall, and to raise the alarm while the disaster was still a problem rather than a catastrophe. Towns that burned, and many towns burned, often burned at night, and the inquests afterward frequently asked the same question. Where was the watch? The watch also dealt with people. Being outside after curfew without a light and a legitimate reason was a punishable offense in most medieval towns. The logic was simple and circular. Honest people are in bed after curfew. Anyone not in bed is therefore not honest. The lantern was your proof of legitimacy. Carrying a visible light meant you had business that could withstand scrutiny. Moving through the streets in the dark without one meant you had business that could not. A watchman who encountered a person without a light could challenge them, detain them, and in some jurisdictions fine them on the spot. The night, legally speaking, was a different country from the day. Crimes committed at night carried heavier penalties than the same crimes committed in daylight, because darkness implied intent. If you stole something during the day, you might have acted on impulse. If you stole something at night, you had planned it. The dark was an aggravating factor built into the legal code. The cost of maintaining a town watch was borne by the community through taxation or through the conscription system, where citizens were required to take turns serving on the watch as part of their civic obligation. Neither system was popular. The taxes were resented because they were taxes. The conscription was resented because standing in the cold for 8 hours listening to dogs bark was not anyone's idea of a pleasant evening, and the men who served often did so with the enthusiasm of a modern citizen called for jury duty. The watch was essential, universally acknowledged as essential, and universally disliked by everyone who had to pay for it or participate in it. The watchman's cry, called at each hour from a fixed set of positions along his route, served as the town's clock. Most households had no timepiece of any kind. The church bell marked the canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, terce, and so on, but between those bells, the passage of time was unmarked unless the watchman's voice filled the gap. Hearing the cry at 3 a.m. told you where you were in the night. Hearing it meant the watchman was alive, alert, and the town had not burned. Not hearing it meant something had gone wrong, and the silence was more alarming than any shout. Beyond the walls, beyond the lantern light of the watchman's route, beyond the sealed gate, the darkness was total, and it was full of things. Some of those things were real. Wolves hunted in packs across the forests and open country of medieval Europe, and their range included the land immediately outside town walls. A traveler caught outside the gates after sunset faced a genuine, quantifiable risk of encountering wolves, and the risk increased in winter when prey was scarce and hunger pushed the packs closer to human settlement. Outlaws and bandits operated on the roads between towns, and the dark was their working environment. A person alone on a road at night was a person without protection, without witnesses, and without recourse. The medieval advice for traveling at night was simple: do not. Some of the things in the dark were less tangible, but no less real to the people who believed in them. The wild hunt was a widespread belief across northern and western Europe. a spectral procession of ghostly hunters, phantom horses, and baying hounds that rode across the sky on stormy nights. Hearing the hunt meant danger, seeing the hunt meant death, or abduction, or a year of catastrophic bad luck. The wild hunt appeared in chronicles, sermons, and folk tales, from England to Scandinavia to Germany, and the consistency of the descriptions across centuries and cultures suggests a belief so deeply rooted that it survived every attempt by the Church to reclassify it as superstition or demonic deception. Will-o'-the-wisps, the flickering lights that appeared over marshes and bogs, were believed to be spirits of the dead, or demons, or fairy lights, designed to lure travelers off safe paths and into drowning water. Modern science explains them as the ignition of marsh gases, methane, and phosphine rising from decomposing organic matter. The medieval explanation was that something in the dark wanted you dead, and was clever enough to use light, the one thing you craved in the darkness, as bait. Both explanations produce the same practical advice: do not follow the light. The medieval version is arguably more memorable. Revenants were the walking dead. Not the elegant, seductive vampires of later fiction, but bloated, malicious corpses that returned from the grave to torment the living. The 12th century chronicler William of Newburgh recorded several revenant stories with the sober, factual tone of a journalist reporting local news. A dead man returns. He wanders the village at night. He spreads disease. He attacks sleepers. The solution, in nearly every account, involves exhuming the body, finding it suspiciously undecayed, and destroying it through burning or dismemberment. These were not fairy tales told for entertainment. They were reported events, written down by educated men who believed they were documenting facts, and they were terrifying to a population that had no electric light, no rational framework for dismissing them, and every reason to take seriously the claim that the dead could walk. You assume medieval night fears were the silly superstitions of credulous people. Consider what the night actually was: no light, no visibility beyond arm's reach, no authority that could respond faster than a man could run with a lantern, no explanation for the sounds that came from the dark that did not involve something alive and moving, no certainty that the morning would be the same as the evening. In a world like that, the fear was not irrational. It was proportional. The dark was genuinely dangerous, populated by real wolves, real criminals, and real risks that could not be assessed until dawn revealed what the night had left behind. The supernatural beliefs layered on top of the real dangers were not a failure of reason. They were an extension of an accurate perception that the night was hostile, pushed beyond the limits of what could be explained, and into the territory of what could only be feared. You are lying in your bed. The prayers have been said. The door is barred. The fire is covered. The dog is at your feet, and the darkness is pressing against the shutters, like something that wants to come in. You know, with the rational part of your mind, that the bar will hold, and the walls are solid, and the watchman is out there somewhere, calling the hours into the cold air. But the other part of your mind, the older part, the part that was afraid of the dark long before anyone taught it a reason, that part is listening. And it will go on listening, softly, beneath the surface of your sleep, until the light returns. Sleep, in this world, is never far from its older, quieter sibling. The resemblance between the two was not a metaphor that medieval people used for literary effect. It was a theological observation that they took with absolute seriousness. A sleeping person and a dead person look the same. The eyes are closed. The body is still. The breath, in deep sleep, is shallow enough to be invisible. The limbs do not move. The face is slack, emptied of expression, returned to a neutrality that is not peace and not distress, but something older than both. A medieval person looking at a sleeping family member and a medieval person looking at a dead one saw the same image, and the similarity was not lost on a culture that spent a great deal of its intellectual energy thinking about the boundary between life and death and what crossed it. The theology was explicit. Sleep was a nightly rehearsal for death. The soul, during sleep, was less firmly attached to the body. It wandered. It was vulnerable. It could be reached by forces that the waking mind held at bay. Every night, when you closed your eyes, you practiced dying. And every morning, when you opened them, you practiced resurrection. The cycle of sleep and waking was a small, daily echo of the great cycle that every Christian soul would eventually complete, the final sleep and the final waking on the day of judgment. This is why the bedtime prayers mattered so urgently. You were not simply asking for a good night's rest. You were committing your soul to God's protection during the hours when it was exposed and undefended. The prayer, "If I should die before I wake," is not a gentle children's rhyme composed for cozy bedtimes. It is a medieval anxiety, spoken aloud by adults who understood that sleep was a state of genuine spiritual risk, and who believed, with the full weight of their faith, that death could arrive during the night and find them unprepared. The positioning of the dead for burial echoed the recommended sleeping position with a precision that was deliberate. The body was laid on its back, hands folded across the chest, facing east, toward Jerusalem, toward the rising sun, toward the direction from which Christ would return. The recommended sleeping position, right side, head elevated, body arranged with care, was a living version of this same orientation. You prepared for sleep the way you would be prepared for burial. The bed and the coffin were variations on the same piece of furniture. The blanket and the shroud served the same function. The darkness of the bedroom and the darkness of the grave were the same darkness, differing only in duration, and yet they slept, every night, despite the theology, despite the fear, despite the wolves and the revenants and the dark and the understanding that sleep was a small death practiced in the hope of a small resurrection. They said the prayers, and they lay down, and they let the darkness take them, because the body demanded it, and the body has never been interested in theology. The courage in that act, the quiet, repeated, nightly surrender to unconsciousness by people who believed the unconsciousness might be permanent, is easy to miss if you have grown up in a world where sleep is a biological function and death is a medical event, and the two have been cleanly separated by centuries of science. For them, the two overlapped. Every night was a small act of faith. Every morning was a small confirmation that the faith had been rewarded. The night is deep now. The fears have receded to the edges of the room, held there by the prayers and the barred door and the warmth of the bodies beside you. The dog sighs in its sleep. The embers pulse, a faint orange glow, dimmer now than an hour ago, fading slowly toward the ash that morning will find. And your body, this medieval body that has worked and eaten and prayed and lain down in the correct position on the correct side, is sinking deeper into the straw, deeper into the warmth, deeper into the old, familiar dark. And in that dark, the body itself is at work. The humors are shifting, rebalancing, performing the invisible maintenance that medieval medicine believed was the entire purpose of sleep. Medieval physicians knew exactly why you slept. They were wrong about all of it, but they knew with a confidence that modern sleep scientists, who are still arguing about the precise function of sleep, might quietly envy. The body, according to the medical tradition inherited from Galen and Hippocrates, and refined by centuries of Arab and European scholarship, operated on a system of 4 humors: blood, which was hot and wet; phlegm, which was cold and wet; yellow bile, which was hot and dry; black bile, which was cold and dry. Health was the balance of these 4 substances. Illness was their imbalance. And sleep was the mechanism by which the body restored equilibrium after the disruptions of the waking day. The waking state was hot and dry. Activity generated heat. Work, movement, digestion, thought, emotion, all of these produced warmth in the body and consumed its moisture. By the end of the day, the balance had shifted toward heat and dryness, which was the territory of yellow bile, and the body needed to correct. Sleep was the correction. Sleep was cold and wet, the domain of phlegm, and the act of lying down in a dark, cool room and surrendering consciousness allowed the cold, wet humor to rise and rebalance the system. The heat dissipated, the moisture returned, the body reset. You woke in the morning restored, not because your brain had consolidated memories or repaired tissue, which is what modern science believes, but because your humors had found their equilibrium again, which is what every educated person in the medieval world believed with equal certainty. This framework produced medical advice about sleep that was remarkably specific and, in several cases, remarkably close to what modern sleep medicine now recommends. Medieval physicians advised sleeping in a cool room. They advised against eating heavy meals before bed, because digestion produced heat that interfered with the cooling process of sleep. They advised against vigorous activity in the hours before sleeping. They recommended regularity, going to bed and waking at consistent times, because the humors responded to rhythm and pattern. They warned against sleeping too long, because excess sleep produced excess phlegm, which led to sluggishness, weight gain, melancholy, and a general dampening of the vital spirits. They warned equally against sleeping too little, because insufficient sleep left the body overheated, agitated, and vulnerable to fever, mania, and emotional instability. The recommended amount of sleep, according to the most widely cited medieval medical authorities, was 7 to 8 hours. This figure appears in texts from the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries, with a consistency that is either a remarkable coincidence or evidence that medieval physicians, working from an entirely incorrect model of how the body functioned, arrived at a number that modern sleep research has spent decades and millions of dollars confirming. They were right for the wrong reasons, which, if you think about it, is better than being wrong for the right reasons, which is what happens every time a modern sleep study contradicts the previous modern sleep study. The humoral model also explained why different people slept differently. A person with a naturally sanguine temperament, dominated by blood, was hot and wet by default and needed less corrective sleep. A person with a melancholic temperament, dominated by black bile, was cold and dry and might need more sleep to restore the moisture their constitution naturally lacked. Children slept more than adults because they were naturally wetter. The elderly slept less because they were naturally drier. Women slept differently from men because their humoral balance was different. Every variation in sleep pattern had an explanation, and the explanation was always internal, always specific to the individual, and always expressed in the language of hot, cold, wet, and dry. You track your sleep with a device on your wrist that measures heart rate variability and movement and assigns you a score each morning. A medieval physician would take your pulse, examine your urine, ask about your dreams, and assign you a temperament, different instruments, different vocabulary, the same underlying project, which is the attempt to understand why some nights are good and some nights are terrible, and why the body refuses to cooperate with the mind's sincere desire to simply close its eyes and disappear for a while. The project has not been completed. The confidence with which it is pursued has not diminished. The gap between what we measure and what we understand has not closed as much as either century would like to admit. The humors are settling now. The heat of the day has dissipated. The cool, wet weight of phlegm is rising through the body, like water filling a vessel, and the consciousness is dimming, and the room is dissolving into its sounds. Listen, the room is never silent. You think of silence as the absence of sound, but medieval silence was not absence. It was a different kind of presence. It was the sound of a world that had stopped speaking and started breathing, and the breathing had layers, and the layers had texture, and if you lay still long enough, the texture became a kind of music. The fire is the bass note, even covered, even banked for the night, with the ashes raked over the coals to keep them alive until morning. The fire makes sound, a low, irregular ticking as the wood contracts in the cooling air, a faint hiss when a pocket of sap or moisture reaches the heat and evaporates. Occasionally, a soft crack, a small collapse of structure within the ember pile, barely audible, just enough to remind you that something in the room is still alive and warm. Above the fire, the house itself. Timber frames expand and contract with temperature changes, and in the deep cold of a winter night, the wood speaks. Creaks that have no visible source. A groan from a beam that has been holding the same weight for 50 years and will hold it for 50 more, but wants you to know it is there. The thatch above your head is its own soundscape, a dry, whispering layer that responds to wind the way water responds to a thrown stone, rippling softly, transmitting the pressure of the air outside into a gentle, continuous murmur that sits just below the threshold of attention. The wind itself, not the dramatic, howling wind of storms, but the ordinary night wind that moves through a village like a slow breath, pressing against walls, finding gaps, threading through the shutter slats with a thin, high whistle that rises and falls without pattern. On a calm night, the wind is barely there, a faint pressure on the ear that you would not notice if you were awake and moving, but that becomes, in the stillness of the bed, a presence as real as the blanket on your body. The animals. The dog's breathing, heavy and slow, punctuated by the occasional twitch and soft whimper of a dream that involves chasing something. The cattle behind the partition, shifting their weight with the heavy, deliberate movement of large animals that never fully sleep, their hooves pressing into the straw with a sound like a slow, distant drumbeat. A horse, if you own one, exhaling through its nostrils in a long, warm stream that you can hear across the room. An owl, outside, close, the single low note followed by the double note, repeated at intervals that seem random but are not. Each call a declaration of territory, delivered to an audience of field mice and other owls. The church bell. Even at night, even between the formal hours, the bell exists as a potential sound, a weight hanging in the tower, ready, and the knowledge that it will ring at matins gives the silence before it a quality of anticipation, like the pause between breaths. When it finally rings, the sound travels across the village in a single wave, touching every house, entering every room through the walls and the shutters and the thatch, and for a moment, the entire sleeping world is united by one sound, and beneath everything, beneath the fire and the wind and the animals and the bell, the breathing, the people beside you, the child tucked against your back, breathing in the fast, shallow rhythm of a small body, your spouse, breathing deeper, slower, the rhythm of a person who fell asleep before you and is already far away, the servant on the pallet near the door, breathing with the heavy, effortful regularity of someone whose body is tired in a way that sleep can only partly fix. Your own breathing, which you notice now and cannot stop noticing, which is itself becoming slower, deeper, longer, matching the room, joining the rhythm, adding its voice to the quiet chorus of a house that is alive and warm and full and sleeping. This is the soundscape that carried medieval people into sleep every night of their lives. No white noise machine, no sleep playlist, no app generating the sound of rain on a tin roof or waves on a beach that you have never visited. Just the real, layered, imperfect, living sound of a world that is present and close and breathing alongside you. It is, by any honest measure, better than the recording. It is better because it is real, and because the realness of it means you are not alone, and being not alone in the dark is the oldest comfort there is. The sounds settle into each other, the layers blur, the edges of the room soften, and from somewhere in the house, or somewhere in your memory, or somewhere in the dark space between waking and sleep, a voice begins to sing. The medieval lullaby did not sound like the lullabies you know. The melodies were simple, repetitive, built on intervals that narrowed as the song went on, pulling the scale inward, closing down, the way the eyes close and the world contracts toward sleep. But the words were not gentle. The words were not reassuring. The words, in the fragments that survive in manuscript margins and in collections of popular song, copied by monks who found them worthy of preservation, were about the real world and the real fears of the people singing them. A mother sings to a child about poverty, about the rent that is due, and the grain that is low, and the winter that is coming. She sings about the father who is away, or the father who is dead, or the father who drinks. She sings about the cold and the hunger and the uncertainty of a life that offers no guarantees beyond the next meal. The words are honest in the way that only words sung to someone who cannot understand them can be honest. The child hears the voice, the child hears the melody, the child hears the warmth and the nearness and the rhythm. The child does not hear the content, and the content is for the mother, not the child. The lullaby is the one moment in the day when she can say the truth out loud and have it received as music. Lully, lulle, thou little tiny child. This line survives from a medieval carol associated with the Feast of the Holy Innocents, the commemoration of the children killed by Herod. It was sung as a lullaby. It was sung to real children by real mothers who understood that the world killed children and that the only thing standing between this child and that fate was luck and prayer and the thin protection of a mother's arms in the dark. The sweetness of the melody and the horror of the context existed in the same breath, which is something that modern lullabies, scrubbed clean of anything that might disturb, have lost entirely. The last sound of the medieval night, before sleep takes the house completely, is the night prayer spoken aloud by the head of the household. The words are familiar. They have been spoken every night in this room for as long as anyone can remember. They ask for protection. They ask for peace. They ask for the morning to come and to bring with it the people who are here now, whole and alive and unchanged. The prayer is the last communal act of the day, the final moment when the household exists as a single unit before sleep separates each person into their own private dark. The voice finishes. The room holds the last word for a moment, the way a bell holds its note after the clapper has stopped. Then the silence fills in. And the silence is not empty. It is full of breathing, full of warmth, full of the small, persistent sounds of a world that is resting but not gone. The fire ticks, the wind moves, the dog sighs, the child's breathing slows to the steady, bottomless rhythm of a sleep so deep that nothing in the world could reach it. And the night goes on. The night goes on, and somewhere in the house, the smallest person is sleeping the deepest sleep. The baby sleeps in a cradle beside the bed, close enough for the mother to reach without standing. The cradle is simple, a wooden box, roughly the size of a modern laundry basket, set on curved rails that allow it to rock with a gentle push of the hand. Some cradles have a hood, a curved wicker cover arching over the top, and this cover is not decorative. It is a safety measure designed to prevent the one danger that every medieval parent feared more than fever, more than famine, more than the 100 small catastrophes that carried children away in the first years of life. Overlaying, the word sounds soft. The reality was not. A parent, asleep, exhausted, rolled onto an infant sharing the bed and suffocated it. The child made no sound, or the sound it made was too small to penetrate the depth of a parent's sleep, and the morning revealed what the night had done. It happened often enough to appear in church legislation, in penitential manuals, in the records of ecclesiastical courts, and in the coroner's rolls that documented sudden deaths across medieval England. The entries are brief: a child's name, the parents' names, the date, found dead in the bed, the cause, noted without elaboration, as though the clerk writing it had written the same line before and would write it again, a fine levied against the household. The next entry in the roll concerns a stolen horse or a dispute over land. The record moves on. It does not pause to ask how the mother felt when she woke. The church responded with regulation. Synods across Europe issued decrees prohibiting parents from taking infants into the bed after a certain age, usually 1 year, sometimes earlier. The cradle with the arched cover was recommended, and in some regions mandated, as a barrier between the sleeping parent and the sleeping child. In parts of Italy, A device called the arcuccio was used, a rigid cage placed over the infant in the bed to create a protective shell that a rolling body could not collapse. These were engineering solutions to a problem that had no other solution in a world where families shared a single bed, and the bed was not large enough to guarantee safe distance between a grown adult and a newborn. The swaddled baby in the cradle is wrapped tight. Linen bands wound around the body, from shoulders to feet, binding the arms to the sides, restricting movement, creating a firm, compact bundle that medieval parents believed kept the limbs straight, the body warm, and the child calm. Modern pediatrics has moved away from tight swaddling and then partially back toward it, and then away again, which tells you that the question of how tightly to wrap a baby has not been settled in 600 years of trying. The medieval mother wrapping her child in linen bands and rocking the cradle with one hand while lying on her side in the dark was performing an act so instinctive, so deeply human, so unchanged across every century and every culture that describing it feels almost unnecessary. You know this. Every generation has known this. The materials change. The hand on the cradle does not. The child sleeps on, rocked by the motion, held by the swaddling, breathing in the small, fast rhythm that sounds like a bird's heartbeat if you press your ear close enough to hear it. And the mother's hand slows on the cradle rail, and her own breathing deepens, and the two of them sink into sleep together, separately, the child in the wooden box and the mother on the straw, connected by the sound of each other's breathing and the faint warmth that crosses the narrow gap between them. The gap between the cradle and the bed is a few inches. The gap between this bed and the bed of the richest person in England is a universe. The great bed of a medieval lord is a monument. It is not a piece of furniture in the way that your bed is a piece of furniture, something you bought and assembled and covered with a duvet and forgot about. It is a statement. It is a political declaration made in oak and linen and embroidered silk, and it sits in the center of the great chamber, not because the Lord needs somewhere to sleep, but because every person who enters that room needs to understand exactly how much money is lying in it. The frame is carved, not simply finished, not sanded smooth and left plain, but carved with figures, with coats of arms, with foliage and beasts and scrollwork that represents weeks of a skilled woodworker's time. The posts rise to support a canopy, a wooden or fabric ceiling above the bed, from which hang curtains on all four sides. The curtains are the most expensive component. They are embroidered, sometimes with gold thread, sometimes with scenes from scripture or romance, sometimes with the heraldic devices of the family. A single set of bed curtains for a wealthy household could cost 6 months to a year of a skilled craftsman's entire wages. 1 year of a person's working life, converted into fabric and thread, and hung around the place where another person sleeps. Inside the curtains, the bed is a world. The mattress is goose feather, thick, soft, absurdly comfortable by the standards of anyone who has spent a night on straw. The sheets are fine linen, smooth, white, changed regularly by servants. The pillows, plural, because the wealthy sleep on individual pillows rather than a shared bolster, are stuffed with down. The blankets are wool, fur, sometimes silk. The enclosed space created by the drawn curtains holds warmth, blocks drafts, and creates a darkness within the darkness that is dense and soft and absolute. And on the floor outside this paradise, the servants sleep. The groom of the bedchamber sleeps on a trundle bed that pulls out from beneath the great bed at night and slides back under it in the morning, invisible during the day, essential during the night. The page sleeps on a pallet by the door, positioned to hear anyone approaching the chamber and to rise before they arrive. A body servant might sleep on the floor beside the bed, close enough to hear the Lord call in the night, close enough to attend to whatever need arises at whatever hour it arises. These people are paid to sleep badly. Their entire function during the night is to remain available, to remain alert enough to respond, to sacrifice the depth and comfort of their own rest so that the person in the great bed can sleep undisturbed. The Lord sleeps on feathers, behind curtains, on linen, in warmth. The page sleeps on the floor, in the draught from the door, on a straw pallet no better than a peasant's, with one ear permanently open. The distance between the two is 3 feet. The distance between their experiences of the night is immeasurable. Everyone in this room is sleeping. Only one of them is resting. And the one who is resting will wake in the morning and not think, even for a moment, about the quality of sleep experienced by the person who lay on the floor to make that rest possible. The richest bed in England and the poorest bed in England produce the same number of hours of unconsciousness. The same dreams visited both. The same darkness held both. The same bell rang for both at midnight. The money bought comfort and display and the labor of other people's wakefulness. It did not buy better sleep. It never has. The curtains are drawn. The canopy blocks the ceiling. The great bed is a room inside a room, a box of warmth and softness sealed against the world. And outside its fabric walls, the night is doing what the night has been doing for the entire length of this story. It is getting longer. Winter is here. The sun set at 3:30 in the afternoon, and it will not rise again until 8 in the morning. That is 16.5 hours of darkness. 16.5 hours in which you cannot work, cannot see, cannot do anything that requires light, because light is a luxury that disappears in 4 hours and costs a day's wages to replace. The winter night is not a period of rest. It is an occupation. It is the single longest continuous experience of your day, and you have to fill it with something, and the something is sleep, and more sleep, and the watch between sleeps, and more sleep again. The first sleep starts earlier in winter. You go to bed at 7, maybe earlier, because the dark arrived at 3:30, and the 4 hours since then have been spent in near blindness, doing whatever could be done by firelight before the curfew bell covered even that. The first sleep stretches 4 hours, sometimes 5. The watch begins at midnight and lasts longer in winter, because the body has more darkness to distribute, and the second sleep does not need to end at a fixed hour. You might be awake until 1 or 2, lying in the dark, praying, talking, eating, existing in the quiet. Then the second sleep carries you until dawn, which is not the sharp, bright dawn of summer, but a slow, gray, reluctant brightening that seeps through the shutters like water through cloth. You spend more of your life asleep in winter than in summer. This is not laziness. This is mathematics. The body follows the light, and when the light goes away for 16 hours, the body fills the gap with the only activity that does not require seeing. Medieval manorial records reflect this pattern. Winter work obligations were lighter. Winter days were shorter. The expectation that a laborer would produce the same output in December as in June did not exist, because the December day was half the length, and the December body had spent 14 hours in bed. The rhythm of medieval life expanded and contracted with the sun, breathing in during winter, breathing out during summer, the way a lung fills and empties, the way a tide rises and falls, the way the whole world used to pulse, with a rhythm that electricity has flatlined into a constant, steady, unvarying hum. You have never experienced a winter night this long. Your shortest day still has electric light from the moment you choose to turn it on until the moment you choose to turn it off, and the choice is yours, and the cost is negligible, and the dark is therefore optional, in a way that it has never been optional before in the history of human beings living on this planet. The medieval winter night was not optional. It was mandatory. You sat in it. You lay in it. You breathed in it. You let it press against you for 16 hours, and you did not resist, because resistance required fuel, and fuel required money, and money had left the house with the last sack of grain. The dark was where you lived for half the year, and you made your peace with it the way you made your peace with everything else that could not be changed, quietly, without complaint, with a prayer and a blanket and the warmth of the people lying beside you. The sky outside the shutters is the darkest it will be all night. No moon, No cloud reflecting any distant light, just the stars, thick and bright and impossibly numerous, visible through the gaps in the wood, burning in a silence so complete that you can almost believe you can hear them. The Milky Way is a river of light pouring across the sky from horizon to horizon, and it is the most beautiful thing in the medieval night, and it is the one thing you share with the Lord in his great bed, and the monk in his cold dormitory, and the pilgrim under his cloak, and the watchman on his rounds. Everyone sees the same sky, everyone sleeps under the same stars, and the stars do not care who is sleeping on feathers and who is sleeping on straw. The night is ending now. Not yet, not for hours, but the ending has begun in the way that endings always begin, softly, at the edges, where you are not looking. So tonight, as you settle into your warm, clean bed, with the light switch within reach and the phone charging on the nightstand and the thermostat holding the room at exactly the temperature you prefer, spare a gentle thought for them. The real ones, not the cartoon peasants from the history books or the grim-faced sufferers from the documentaries, but the actual, breathing, complicated, funny, tired, stubborn, tender human beings who lay down every night in the dark and hoped for the morning. They worried about the same things you worry about: the money, the children, the cough that will not go away, the work that is never finished, the future that will not come into focus, no matter how long you stare at it in the dark. They shifted in the straw to find the comfortable spot, the one position where the hip does not press against the rope, and the straw does not poke through the linen, and the blanket covers the shoulder and the foot at the same time. They listened to the person beside them breathing and felt, for a moment, the simple, ancient relief of not being alone. They were not simpler than you. They were not tougher. They were not more afraid of the dark, or braver in the face of it, or more resigned to its weight. They were exactly as human as you are, lying in exactly the same darkness, with exactly the same hope that the morning would come and bring something worth getting up for. The straw has settled, the blanket is warm, the dog has stopped sighing. The child's breathing has slowed to a rhythm so steady it could measure time. The fire is ash now, gray and soft, holding the memory of warmth the way the room holds the memory of voices. The bells will not ring again until dawn. Rest easy now. Let the old world go quiet. Let the fire burn down and the stars turn slowly overhead, and the long, strange, beautiful, difficult night fold itself gently around you, like a wool blanket that has been keeping people warm for 600 years. Close your eyes. The second sleep is here, and it has always known the way.